The mountain ridge fell silent except for the whisper of wind through jagged rocks. Somewhere in the darkness below, 8 Navy SEALs lay pinned down by enemy fire, their ammunition running dangerously low. Each muzzle flash from the surrounding hills marked another step closer to their graves. Command had lost radio contact 3 hours ago. No backup was coming. No extraction helicopter could reach them through the storm of bullets that had already claimed 2 of their brothers. But high above in the shadows of an impossible cliff face, a figure moved like smoke between the stones. No radio chatter. No coordination with the trap team below. Just a lone marksman who had been tracking this enemy force for days, waiting for the perfect moment when mathematics and death would dance together in the crosshairs of a rifle scope. The SEALs didn't know salvation watched them from above. The enemy fighters celebrating their impending victory had no idea that their own death sentences were already being written in the precise calculations of wind speed, bullet drop, and human heartbeats. In the next few minutes, the silent ghost among the rocks would turn what seemed like certain defeat into one of the most legendary rescues in special operations history. This is the story of that impossible shot, and the man who took it. The morning sun painted the Afghan mountains in shades of gold and shadow when Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun received the call that would change everything. 3 weeks into what was supposed to be a routine surveillance mission, intelligence had intercepted chatter about a high-value target moving through the Kuna province. The man they called the chemist had been responsible for training bomb makers across 3 countries, and his capture could save countless lives. Chun stood 6 feet tall, with the lean build of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of remaining invisible. His dark eyes held the calm intensity that marked him as different from other soldiers. While his teammates called him Ghost, the nickname had nothing to do with his Asian heritage and everything to do with his uncanny ability to appear and disappear without a trace. In 5 years of special operations, no enemy fighter had ever spotted Chun before he wanted to be seen. The briefing room buzzed with the controlled energy that preceded every major operation. 8 SEALs from Team 7 had been selected for what Command labeled a surgical extraction. The intelligence suggested the chemist will be traveling with minimal security through a mountain pass that offered perfect ambush opportunities. Get in fast, grab the target, and disappear before enemy reinforcements could respond. Team leader Lieutenant Jake Morrison spread the topographical maps across the wooden table. Morrison was a decorated officer who had led more successful operations than most soldiers ever participated in. His blonde hair had started showing gray streaks at 32, each one earned through nights like this when split-second decisions meant the difference between mission success and body bags. The target will be moving through here at approximately 0300 hours. Morrison said, pointing to a narrow valley between 2 ridgelines. Intelligence suggests he'll have between 4 and 8 fighters with him. We'll establish overwatch positions on both sides of the pass and coordinate a synchronized takedown. Petty Officer First Class Danny Rodriguez, the team's communications specialist, raised his hand. Rodriguez had grown up in the mountains of Colorado and understood terrain better than most. Sir, what about the weather? The forecast shows a storm system moving in around midnight. We'll adapt, Morrison replied. The mission timeline gives us flexibility. If conditions deteriorate, we'll postpone until the following night. Chun studied the maps with the methodical attention that had kept him alive through dozens of similar operations. Something about the planned approach bothered him, though he couldn't immediately identify what triggered his instincts. The valley looked perfect for an ambush, which meant it also looked perfect for a counter-ambush. Any experienced fighter would recognize the tactical disadvantage of traveling through such obvious killing ground. What's our exfiltration plan if things go sideways? Asked Petty Officer Second Class Mike Torres, the team's explosives expert. Torres was built like a linebacker, but moved with surprising grace. His questions always focused on worst-case scenarios because he had survived situations where optimistic planning got good men killed. Morrison traced a route on the map. Primary extraction point is here, approximately 2 clicks from the ambush site. If that's compromised, we have secondary and tertiary locations marked. The helicopter will remain on station for 30 minutes before pulling back to base. Chun continued studying the topographical lines, his finger following elevation changes and natural cover positions. The planned overwatch positions offered excellent fields of fire into the valley, but they also left the snipers exposed to counterattack from higher ground. If the chemist was as tactically sophisticated as his reputation suggested, he might have scouts positioned on the surrounding peaks. "Sir," Chun said, breaking his silence, "what about this ridgeline here?" He pointed to a position nearly 1,000 meters from the planned ambush site. "It's got elevation advantage over everything else in the area." Morrison glanced at the location. "Too far from the action. If we need to provide close support, you'd be out of effective range." "Depends on the rifle," Chen replied quietly. The other team members exchanged glances. Chen's skill with long-range weapons had become legendary within their unit. During their last deployment, he had made shots that other snipers insisted were impossible. But Morrison preferred keeping his team close enough to provide mutual support. "Negative, Ghost. You'll be positioned here with Torres as your spotter." Morrison indicated a position 600 meters from the valley floor. "That gives you perfect coverage of the kill zone while keeping you close enough to assist if we run into trouble." Chen nodded without argument, but his unease remained. In his experience, the obvious tactical choice was often the wrong one. The best snipers survived by thinking differently than their enemies expected. But orders were orders, and Morrison had successfully completed more operations than any other team leader in their battalion. The next 12 hours passed in the familiar rhythm of pre-mission preparation. Weapons were cleaned and re-cleaned. Equipment was checked, double-checked, and arranged for maximum efficiency. Each man went through personal rituals that helped focus his mind on the deadly work ahead. Chun spent his time with his rifle, a custom-modified M110 automatic sniper system that had been perfectly calibrated to his specifications. The weapon had become an extension of his body through thousands of hours of practice. He could field strip and reassemble it blindfolded in under 3 minutes. He knew exactly how it would perform at any range, in any weather condition, with any type of ammunition. As evening approached, the team gathered for final equipment checks. Each man carried approximately 60 pounds of gear, including weapons, ammunition, communications equipment, medical supplies, and emergency rations. Their faces were painted with camouflage patterns that would help them blend into the rocky terrain. Rodriguez monitored weather reports on his tablet. "Storm system is tracking faster than predicted," he announced. "We might see rain and wind starting around 0 to 100 hours. We'll be in position by then," Morrison said. "A little weather might actually work in our favor. Sound carries differently in the rain, and visibility drops for everyone." Torres adjusted the straps on his pack. "As long as lightning doesn't turn us into human landing strips, I'm good with a little precipitation." The helicopter ride to their insertion point took 47 minutes of flying through mountain passes that seemed barely wide enough for the aircraft's rotors. Chen sat near the door, watching the landscape pass below through night vision goggles. The terrain was brutally unforgiving, all jagged peaks and deep valleys carved by centuries of wind and water. Their pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Kim, had a reputation for being able to land a helicopter anywhere there was enough flat ground for the skids. She had extracted teams from positions that other pilots declared impossible to reach. Tonight, she would be inserting them onto a narrow plateau approximately 4 kilometers from their target area. 2 minutes out, Kim's voice crackled through their headphones. "Winds are picking up, so this might be a little bumpy." The helicopter settled onto the rocky ground with mechanical precision. Before the rotors stopped turning, all 8 SEALs had exited the aircraft and disappeared into the darkness. Kim lifted off immediately, leaving them alone in the vast silence of the mountains. Morrison checked his GPS and pointed toward their first waypoint. The team moved in single file, each man maintaining visual contact with the person ahead while staying alert for signs of enemy activity. Their night vision equipment turned the landscape into a green-tinted world of shadows and shapes. The hike to their positions took 2 hours of careful movement through terrain that tested their physical conditioning and tactical skills. Chen found himself constantly scanning the higher elevations, his instincts still warning him about threats they might not have anticipated. The intelligence briefing had seemed too clean, too simple for a target as valuable as the chemist. When they reached the planned overwatch positions, Morrison deployed his men with military precision. Chen and Torres moved to their assigned location, a rocky outcrop that provided excellent concealment and clear fields of fire into the target valley. The position was tactically sound, offering multiple escape routes and good protection from return fire. Chen began setting up his rifle while Torres established communication with the other teams. The wind was increasing steadily, and Chen could smell rain in the air. Weather would complicate the shot calculations, but he had made successful hits in worse conditions. "Ghost, this is actual." Morrison's voice came through their radio. "Report when you're set." "Ghost in position," Chen replied after completing his weapon setup. "Clear fields of fire. Ready to engage." Around them, the mountain night seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the darkness below, their target was approaching. In less than 2 hours, either they would complete their mission successfully, or the operation would become another lesson in why no plan survives contact with the enemy. Chen settled behind his rifle and began his mental calculations for the shots he might need to make. Distance to target area, 640 meters. Wind speed, approximately 15 miles per hour from the southwest. Temperature, 43 degrees Fahrenheit, and dropping. All factors that would affect bullet trajectory and timing. As he adjusted his scope settings, Chen couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would test everything he had learned about survival in hostile territory. The mountains held secrets, and some of those secrets were about to reveal themselves in ways that would change all of their lives forever. The first raindrops began falling at exactly 02:15 hours, just as Rodriguez had predicted. Chen felt them hitting his face like cold pinpricks while he maintained his position behind the rifle scope. Through the magnified optics, the valley below appeared as a maze of shadows and shifting vegetation that could conceal an army of fighters. Torres lay beside him with a spotting scope, his weathered face partially hidden beneath his night vision goggles. The two men had worked together for 3 years, developing the kind of wordless communication that kept sniper teams alive in hostile territory. Torres could read Chen's body language and anticipate what information he needed before Chen had to ask for it. "Movement on the north ridge," Torres whispered, his voice barely audible above the increasing wind. 2 o'clock, approximately 800 meters. Chen shifted his scope to the indicated position and immediately spotted what his spotter had seen. 3 figures were moving along a ridgeline that wasn't supposed to contain any enemy personnel, according to their intelligence briefing. The men carried weapons and moved with the disciplined spacing of experienced fighters. "Actual, this is Ghost," Chen said quietly into his radio microphone. "We have movement on the north ridge. 3 personnel, armed, moving toward overwatch positions." Morrison's response came back immediately. "Copy, Ghost. Continue monitoring. All teams report status." As the other team members checked in with situation reports, Chen felt his unease deepening into genuine concern. The chemist's security detail was supposed to be minimal, but the fighters on the ridge suggested a much larger force than anticipated. Experienced bomb makers didn't survive in Afghanistan by traveling with inadequate protection. The rain intensified, turning from scattered drops into a steady precipitation that would complicate visibility and sound detection for everyone in the area. Chen adjusted his scope settings to compensate for the moisture on the lens and the changing atmospheric conditions that would affect bullet trajectory. At 02:45 hours, Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio with an edge of urgency that made everyone pay attention. "Actual, this is calm. I'm picking up radio chatter on multiple frequencies. Sounds like coordinated movement from at least 4 different groups." "Language?" Morrison asked. "Mix of Pashto and what sounds like tactical calls in English. Someone down there has professional military training." Chen exchanged a glance with Torres. Professional military training suggested foreign fighters with special operations backgrounds, the kind of adversaries who understood counter-sniper tactics and wouldn't make the mistakes that kept amateur insurgents from becoming serious threats. Through his scope, Chun continued scanning the approaches to their valley, methodically checking every position that could conceal enemy personnel. The systematic search pattern was something he had practiced thousands of times, but tonight the familiar routine felt different. Every shadow seemed to move. Every cluster of rocks looked like it might hide armed men. "Ghost, this is actual." Morrison's voice carried new tension. "I need you to expand your scan to include the eastern approaches. We may have underestimated the size of this operation." Chun began shifting his focus to the areas Morrison had indicated, but movement in his peripheral vision caused him to freeze. On a ridgeline nearly 900 meters away, muzzle flashes were beginning to strobe in the darkness. Someone was firing automatic weapons into the valley where his teammates were positioned. "Contact!" Morrison's voice exploded through the radio. "Taking fire from multiple positions. Ghost, I need immediate suppression on the eastern ridge." Chun swung his rifle toward the muzzle flashes and began acquiring targets. Through his scope, he could see enemy fighters positioned behind rocks and vegetation, their weapons trained on his teammates' locations below. The range was at the edge of his rifle's effective capability, but well within his personal skill level. His first shot took down a fighter who was firing an AK-47 from behind a boulder. The man dropped immediately, his weapon clattering against the rocks. Chun worked the bolt and acquired his second target, a gunman who was attempting to flank Morrison's position from the north. "Good hits, Ghost," Torres called out, tracking Chen's shots through his spotting scope. "Target down at 11 o'clock, second target moving to cover." But even as Chun eliminated individual threats, more enemy fighters seemed to appear from positions they hadn't anticipated. The carefully planned ambush was turning into a full-scale firefight, with his teammates caught in a valley that was becoming a killing ground. "Actual, this is Bravo Team," came the voice of Petty Officer Kevin Walsh over the radio. "We're taking heavy fire from the South Ridge. Request immediate extraction." "Negative on extraction," Morrison replied, his voice strained with the effort of coordinating defensive fire while under attack. "Landing zone is too hot. We need to fight our way to a secondary position." Chun continued engaging targets on the eastern ridge, but his ammunition was limited and the enemy seemed to have an endless supply of fighters. Each shot had to count, which meant taking time to ensure accuracy rather than providing the rapid suppression fire that his teammates desperately needed. "Ghost, can you get eyes on our 6? Morrison asked. "I think we got movement coming up behind us." Chun shifted his scope to check the area behind his teammates' positions and immediately saw the threat Morrison had detected. A group of armed fighters was moving through a ravine that would put them in perfect position to attack the SEALs from behind. The tactical situation was rapidly becoming impossible. "Confirmed movement on your 6, Chin reported. "At least 6 personnel with automatic weapons, approximately 400 meters from your position, and closing." The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple. His teammates were outnumbered, outgunned, and caught in terrain that favored the attackers. Even if Chun could eliminate every target he could see, there were too many enemy fighters approaching from too many directions. Torres grabbed his arm. "Marcus, we need to move. They know where we are now." As if to emphasize his point, bullets began impacting the rocks around their position. Someone on the enemy side had spotted their muzzle flashes and was directing fire toward their location. Chun and Torres were about to lose their concealment and become targets instead of hunters. "All teams, this is actual." Morrison's voice carried the controlled desperation of a leader who was running out of options. "We are surrounded and taking casualties. Come, give me that extraction helicopter now." Rodriguez's response was immediate and devastating. "Actual, helicopter is 30 minutes out minimum. Pilot says the weather is too severe for night extraction from our current position." Chun felt the cold reality of their situation settling over him like the mountain rain. 30 minutes was longer than they could survive against the coordinated attack that was developing around them. The enemy had turned their planned ambush into a trap, and now 8 of the military's most elite fighters were about to pay the price for underestimating their adversaries. Ghost, this is actual. Morrison's voice was quieter now, carrying the weight of command decisions that no leader should have to make. I need you and Torres to extract to the emergency rally point. Someone needs to survive to report what happened here. Negative, actual, Chin replied without hesitation. We don't leave teammates behind. But as he spoke, Chan was already calculating distances and angles for a different kind of solution. The emergency rally point was located on a high ridge approximately 1,500 meters from the current firefight. From that position, a skilled marksman with the right equipment might be able to provide effective long-range support. 1,500 meters was beyond the normal effective range of his current rifle, but Chen had made successful shots at similar distances during training exercises. The difference was that training targets didn't shoot back, and missing tonight would mean watching his teammates die. Torres, he said quietly, pack everything. We're moving to high ground. Torres understood immediately. In 3 years of working together, he had learned to recognize when Chen was planning something that other people would consider impossible. How high? High enough to see everything, Chen replied, already breaking down his rifle for movement. And high enough to reach everything. As bullets continued hitting the rocks around them, Chen made the decision that would define the rest of his military career. Instead of following orders to retreat to safety, he would position himself where he could attempt shots that existed only in the theoretical limits of marksmanship skill. His teammates were depending on him to do something that couldn't be done, which meant he would have to do it anyway. Moving through hostile territory while carrying a precision rifle system required a special kind of madness that Chun had perfected over years of special operations. He and Torres covered the 1,500 meters to the high ridge in 23 minutes, moving like shadows through terrain that would have challenged mountain goats. Behind them, the sound of gunfire continued to echo through the valleys, each burst reminding them that their teammates were still fighting for their lives. The ridge Chun had selected was a knife edge of rock that jutted from the mountainside like a natural observation post. Getting to it required climbing nearly vertical stone faces while carrying full combat loads. But the position offered unobstructed views of the entire battle area. More importantly, it was high enough to provide the elevation advantage that could make impossible shots theoretically possible. Torres was breathing hard when they reached the position, his face flushed from the combination of physical exertion and thin mountain air. Marcus, this is insane. Even for you. Chin was already setting up his rifle, his movements quick and precise despite the difficult conditions. The rain had turned to sleet, coating everything with a thin layer of ice that made every surface treacherous. His hands were beginning to numb from the cold, but he forced himself to maintain the delicate touch required for precision shooting. Distance to target area, he asked Torres, who was establishing his spotting position beside him. Torres used his range-finding equipment to calculate the exact measurements. 1,537 meters to Morrison's last known position. 1,512 meters to the eastern ridge where you were engaging targets. Atmospheric pressure is dropping. Wind speed approximately 22 miles per hour with gusts up to 30. Those numbers represented the edge of what was physically possible with their equipment. At 1,500 meters, bullet drop would be measured in feet rather than inches. Wind drift would push the projectile several feet off target, if not perfectly calculated. The slightest error in range estimation or environmental conditions would result in complete misses. But Chen had spent years preparing for situations that required perfect shots under impossible conditions. His rifle was loaded with match-grade ammunition that he had personally tested at various ranges. He knew exactly how each round would perform in different weather conditions. The mathematics were complex, but they were mathematics he understood. Actual, this is Ghost, he radioed to Morrison. I'm in position for long-range support. What's your current situation? Morrison's response was punctuated by the sound of gunfire in the background. Ghost, we're pinned down in a rocky depression about 200 meters north of our original position. Enemy has us surrounded on 3 sides. Walsh took a round in the shoulder, but he's still fighting. We've got maybe 20 minutes of ammunition left. Chun adjusted his scope for the new range and began scanning the area Morrison had described. Through the high-powered optics, he could see muzzle flashes from enemy positions on multiple ridgelines. The tactical situation had deteriorated even further since they had left their original position. I count at least 12 enemy positions, Torres reported through his spotting scope. Maybe more hidden in the rocks. They've got your team in a perfect crossfire. Chun began calculating shots for the most critical targets. The enemy fighters on the eastern ridge were in positions that allowed them to pour devastating fire into his teammates' location. Eliminating those threats would give Morrison's team a chance to move to more defensible positions. His first target was a machine gunner approximately 1,520 meters away. The man was firing controlled bursts from behind a large boulder, his weapon creating a steady stream of tracers that lit up the night. Taking him out would eliminate the most dangerous single threat to his teammates. Chin settled behind his rifle and began the mental process that transformed him from a human being into a precision instrument. His breathing slowed to a steady rhythm that would minimize weapon movement. His heart rate dropped as he entered the focused state that experienced snipers called the zone. Wind speed, direction, and variability. Atmospheric pressure and temperature. Range to target and elevation difference. Bullet velocity and ballistic coefficient. All of these factors had to be processed simultaneously and converted into precise adjustments to his point of aim. At 1,500 meters, the bullet would take approximately 2 seconds to reach the target. During those 2 seconds, the enemy fighter could move several feet in any direction. Chen had to predict not just where the target was, but where he would be when the bullet arrived. "Wind call," he asked Torres quietly. Torres was watching vegetation movement through his spotting scope, using natural indicators to measure wind conditions at various points along the bullet's trajectory. Full value right to left, 18 miles per hour at your position. Looks like it's dropping to about 12 at the target area. Chun made his adjustments and settled into his final firing position. Through the scope, he could see his target clearly despite the distance and weather conditions. The man was approximately 40 years old with a dark beard, wearing military-style clothing and a tactical vest. He was firing methodically, taking his time to aim each burst for maximum effectiveness. "On target," Chen whispered, more to himself than to Torres. The rifle bucked against his shoulder as he fired, the sound of the shot echoing across the mountainside. For 2 long seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then, through his scope, Chun saw the machine gunner suddenly slump forward, his weapon falling silent. "Good hit," Torres called out. "Target down." But there was no time to celebrate. Chun immediately began acquiring his next target, a sniper on the northern ridge who was systematically engaging his teammates with precision fire. This shot would be even more difficult because the target was partially concealed behind rocks and vegetation. "Actual, this is Ghost," Chun radioed while tracking his new target. "One threat eliminated. I can see at least 3 more high-priority targets. Are you able to move to better cover?" "Negative, Ghost," Morrison replied. "We're taking too much fire to move. Keep shooting. You're our only chance." Chen's second shot was a miss. The bullet impacted the rocks 6 inches to the left of his intended target, close enough to force the enemy sniper to take cover, but not close enough to eliminate the threat. At extreme range, even small errors in calculation resulted in complete misses. "Wind shifted," Torres observed. "Call it 22 miles per hour, full value." Chun adjusted for the changed conditions and fired again. This time, his bullet found its mark, and the enemy sniper disappeared behind the rocks in a way that suggested he wouldn't be a problem anymore. But for every target Chun eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. The enemy force was larger and better organized than anyone had anticipated. They were using coordinated fire and movement techniques that suggested professional military training, possibly from foreign special operations advisors. "Ghost, this is Bravo team." Walsh's voice came through the radio, weaker now and strained with pain. I can see movement coming up the eastern draw. Looks like at least 8 personnel with heavy weapons. Chun swung his rifle toward the area Walsh had indicated and immediately saw the threat. A group of fighters was moving through a dry stream bed that would bring them within grenade range of his teammates' position. If they reached their destination, the battle would be over in minutes. The lead fighter in the group was carrying what appeared to be an RPG launcher, a weapon that could eliminate Morrison's entire team with a single well-placed shot. Chun had to stop them before they reached firing position, but they were moving fast and using natural cover effectively. His next shot hit the RPG gunner center mass at a range of 1,563 meters. The man dropped immediately, but one of his companions picked up the launcher and continued moving forward. Chun worked his bolt and fired again, taking down the second man. "Outstanding shooting," Torres exclaimed. But there's still 6 more in that group. Chun continued engaging targets in the stream bed, his shots coming faster now as the tactical situation reached a critical point. Each round had to count, because he was down to his last magazine of match-grade ammunition. After that, he would be limited to standard military ammunition that was less accurate at extreme range. Actual enemy reinforcements approaching from the south, Rodriguez reported over the radio. "I count at least 12 personnel with automatic weapons. ETA to your position approximately 10 minutes. The mathematics of survival were becoming impossible. Even if Chun could eliminate every target he could see, there were simply too many enemy fighters converging on his teammate's position. Morrison's team needed to move, but they couldn't move while under direct fire from multiple positions. Chun was about to attempt something that no sniper had ever done in combat. He was going to try to provide enough precision fire support to allow his teammates to break contact and move to defensible positions. It would require making a series of perfect shots under extreme conditions, while enemy fighters were actively trying to kill the people he was protecting. "Torres," he said quietly while tracking another target, "when I finish this magazine, we need to move again. I need a position with better angles on the southern approach." Torres looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Marcus, you've already done the impossible 3 times tonight. How much more do you think you can do?" Chun adjusted his scope and prepared for his next shot. "As much as it takes." The new firing position Chun selected was a narrow ledge carved into the mountainside by centuries of wind and weather. Getting there required rappelling down a cliff face while carrying their equipment, then climbing back up an almost vertical rock wall that tested every skill they had learned in mountain warfare training. But the position offered clear fields of fire into the southern approaches where enemy reinforcements were massing for their final assault. Torres was exhausted. His breathing labored from the combination of thin air and extreme physical demands. "Marcus, my hands are so cold I can barely work the spotting scope. How are you still making these shots?" Chun was setting up his rifle for what might be the most critical engagement of the entire battle. His own hands were numb with cold, and fatigue was beginning to affect his fine motor control. But years of training had taught him to function through physical discomfort that would stop most people from performing complex tasks. "Same way you learn to do anything impossible," he replied while checking his weapon systems. "Practice until impossible becomes routine." Through his scope, Chun could see the southern approach clearly now. Enemy fighters were moving in tactical formations that showed sophisticated military training. They were using cover and concealment effectively, advancing by bounds while maintaining mutual support. These weren't amateur insurgents. These were professional soldiers who understood small unit tactics. "Actual, this is Ghost," Chun radioed to Morrison. "I have eyes on the southern approach. Confirm 12 personnel with automatic weapons and what looks like mortar equipment. They'll be in firing position in approximately 8 minutes." Morrison's response was immediate. "Copy, Ghost. We can see them from here, too. If they get that mortar set up, we're finished." The mortar crew represented the most dangerous threat to his teammates' survival. Indirect fire weapons could eliminate targets behind cover that were safe from direct fire weapons. Once the enemy had the mortar operational, Morrison's team would have no protection regardless of how well they were concealed. Chen began calculating the shot to the mortar position. Range, 1,578 meters. The crew was setting up their weapon behind a cluster of boulders that provided excellent protection from small arms fire. But Chen could see a narrow gap between the rocks that would allow him to engage the gunner if he could time his shot perfectly. Wind call, he asked Torres. Variable winds, 15 to 25 miles per hour. Primary direction right to left, but I'm seeing gusts that shift to straight crosswind. Variable winds at extreme range made precise shooting nearly impossible. Chen would have to time his shot for a moment when wind conditions were most favorable, which meant waiting for an opportunity that might never come. Through his scope, he watched the mortar crew completing their setup procedures. The gunner was a tall man with methodical movements that suggested extensive training on the weapon system. Once he had the mortar ready to fire, Morrison's team would have perhaps 30 seconds before the first rounds began impacting their position. On target, Chen whispered, settling into his final shooting position. He controlled his breathing and waited for the wind conditions to stabilize. Through the scope, he could see vegetation moving with each gust, providing him with real-time information about wind speed and direction. He needed a moment when the wind dropped to its minimum velocity and maintained steady direction. The moment came 30 seconds later. Chen felt the wind decrease and saw the vegetation movements become consistent. He pressed the trigger smoothly, following through with perfect technique while the rifle recoiled against his shoulder. The bullet's flight time at that range was just over 2 seconds. Chen watched through his scope as the mortar gunner suddenly collapsed, his body falling across the weapon in a way that would make it difficult for his teammates to continue the mission. Excellent shot, Torres called out. Mortar gunner is down. But the remaining crew members immediately began trying to clear their weapon and continue the mission. Chen worked his bolt and prepared for a follow-up shot, but the surviving crew members had taken better cover behind the rocks. Actual mortar threat neutralized temporarily, Chen reported. But I cannot maintain suppression on that position indefinitely. You need to move now while you have the opportunity. Copy, Ghost. We're moving to secondary position. Continue providing overwatch. Chen shifted his scope to scan for other threats while his teammates began their tactical movement. Through the high-powered optics, he could see Morrison's team moving in short bounds between available cover, each man covering the others while they advanced toward more defensible terrain. But the enemy had anticipated this movement and positioned fighters to intercept Morrison's team during their withdrawal. Chen spotted at least 4 ambush positions along the route his teammates would have to travel to reach safety. Actual, be advised you have multiple ambush positions along your route, Chen radioed while tracking the closest threat. I'm engaging now. His next series of shots came rapidly as he engaged one ambush position after another. Each shot required complete recalculation of environmental factors because the targets were at different ranges and angles. Chen was operating at the absolute limit of his skill level, making shots that most snipers would consider impossible even under perfect conditions. Ghost, ammunition status? Torres asked quietly. Chen checked his remaining rounds. 6 shots left in this magazine. 2 magazines after that. 18 bullets remaining to protect his teammates against an enemy force that seemed to grow larger every time he looked through his scope. The mathematics were unforgiving, but Chen had learned long ago that mathematics alone didn't determine the outcome of firefights. Actual, this is calm. Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with new urgency. I'm monitoring enemy radio traffic. They're calling for air support. ETA unknown, but we need to be gone before any aircraft arrive. Air support would end the battle immediately. No amount of precision rifle fire could protect his teammates from helicopter gunships or ground attack aircraft. They had to complete their extraction before the enemy's reinforcements arrived. All teams, this is actual Morrison broadcast. Emergency extraction procedures are now in effect. Make your way to tertiary rally point by fastest possible route. Ghost, we need continuous overwatch until we reach the landing zone. Chen began scanning the approaches to the tertiary rally point, identifying potential ambush sites and enemy positions that could threaten his teammates during their withdrawal. The rally point was located on a ridgeline approximately 2 kilometers from their current position, and the route would take them through terrain that favored defensive positions. Through his scope, Chun spotted movement near the rally point that made his blood run cold. Enemy fighters were already in position on the high ground around the landing zone. The extraction site had been compromised, possibly through intercepted radio communications or tactical predictability. The rally point is compromised, Chun reported immediately. I count at least 8 personnel in defensive positions around the LZ. Recommend alternate extraction site. Negative, Ghost, Morrison replied. No alternates available. The helicopter can only reach that specific location given current weather conditions. We'll have to fight our way in. Fighting their way into a defended landing zone while carrying a wounded teammate would require tactical skills and firepower that Morrison's team simply didn't possess. They were outnumbered, low on ammunition, and operating in terrain that favored the enemy. Chun made a decision that would define the rest of his military career. Instead of continuing to provide overwatch from his current position, he would move to a location that would allow him to systematically eliminate the threats around the landing zone before his teammates arrived. Torres, he said while beginning to pack his equipment, we're moving again. Where to this time? Chun pointed to a peak that rose above the extraction site, like a stone tower. Getting there would require climbing nearly vertical rock faces while carrying full equipment loads. The ascent would take at least 30 minutes of dangerous movement through terrain that could kill them even without enemy intervention. But from that peak, Chun would have clear shots at every enemy position around the landing zone. He could eliminate the ambush before his teammates walked into it. That's not climbing, Torres said, staring at the peak. That's mountaineering, with people shooting at us. Chun shouldered his rifle and began checking his climbing equipment. Then, we'd better get started. The climb to the peak took 37 minutes of the most technically difficult movement Chun had ever attempted while carrying combat equipment. The rock face was slick with ice and offered minimal handholds, forcing him to rely on techniques learned during specialized mountain warfare training. Behind him, Torres climbed with the determination of someone who understood that failure meant watching their teammates die. When they reached the summit, Chun was breathing hard and his hands were bleeding from multiple cuts on the sharp rocks. But the position was everything he had hoped it would be. From 800 feet above the extraction site, he had clear fields of fire into every defensive position the enemy had established around the landing zone. Torres collapsed beside him, exhausted from the climb and the cumulative stress of the longest night of their military careers. Marcus, I can barely see straight. How are you going to make precision shots after what we just did? Chun was already setting up his rifle, his movements quick and sure despite his physical fatigue. Years of training had taught him to function through exhaustion that would incapacitate most people. Elite snipers learn to shoot accurately regardless of environmental conditions or personal discomfort. Same way you do anything when lives depend on it, he replied while adjusting his scope settings. You ignore everything except what matters. Through the high-powered optics, Chun could see the enemy positions with crystalline clarity. 8 fighters had positioned themselves in a semicircle around the landing zone, each man armed with automatic weapons and positioned behind cover that would make them nearly invisible to anyone approaching from ground level. But from Chen's elevated position, their concealment worked against them. What hid them from horizontal observation made them visible to vertical observation. Chun could see each fighter clearly, along with their weapons and equipment. Range to closest target, he asked Torres. Torres was establishing his spotting position, his movements slower now, but still professional. Closest target is 732 meters. Farthest target is 915 meters. All targets are below us, so we'll need to account for downward angle compensation. Shooting downward required different calculations than shooting horizontally or upward. Gravity affected bullet trajectory differently when firing at steep angles, and Chen had to adjust his aim points accordingly. But the shorter ranges would make his shots more predictable than the extreme distances he had been engaging earlier. This is Ghost, Chen radioed to Morrison. I'm in position above the LZ. I count 8 enemy personnel in defensive positions. I can eliminate these threats, but I'll need approximately 10 minutes to clear the area. Copy, Ghost, Morrison replied. We're 20 minutes out from the LZ. Make it happen. Chen settled behind his rifle and began the systematic process of eliminating the ambush. His first target was a machine gunner positioned behind a fallen tree approximately 800 meters away. The man was scanning the approaches to the landing zone, his weapon ready to engage Morrison's team the moment they appeared. The shot was clean and precise, the bullet striking the gunner's center mass and dropping him immediately. Chun worked his bolt and acquired his next target without celebrating the success. There would be time for satisfaction after his teammates were safely extracted. His second target was a sniper positioned on a rocky outcrop 750 meters away. This fighter had a scoped rifle and was probably the most dangerous individual threat to the extraction helicopter. Chun could see him scanning the sky, watching for the aircraft that would extract the American team. The second shot was equally successful, eliminating the enemy sniper before he could engage the incoming helicopter. Chun continued working through his target list, each shot calculated and delivered with mechanical precision. By the time he had eliminated 6 of the 8 enemy fighters, the survivors had realized they were being systematically hunted by a sniper they couldn't locate. The remaining 2 fighters abandoned their positions and began moving toward better cover, making Chen's final shots more difficult. Targets are moving, Torres observed through his spotting scope. Both remaining personnel are displacing to the north ridge. Chun tracked the moving targets and led his shots to account for their movement. The 7th shot missed by inches as the fighter dove behind a boulder at the last moment. Chun adjusted his aim and fired again, this time hitting his target successfully. The final enemy fighter had reached a position that provided excellent protection from Chen's elevated angle. The man was hidden in a depression that would allow him to engage the helicopter during landing, but Chen couldn't get a clear shot at him from his current position. Actual 7 threats eliminated, Chen reported. 1 remaining fighter in a position I cannot engage from here. He's in the depression approximately 50 meters north of the LZ. Copy, Ghost. We'll handle the remaining threat when we arrive. But Chen knew that handling the remaining threat would mean exposing his teammates to potentially deadly fire during the most vulnerable phase of their extraction. The helicopter would be a stationary target while loading personnel, and a single enemy fighter with an automatic weapon could turn the extraction into a disaster. Chen made his final decision of the night. Instead of remaining in his overwatch position, he would descend from the peak and eliminate the remaining threat at close range. It meant abandoning the tactical advantage of his elevated position, but it also meant ensuring his teammates could extract safely. Torres, I'm going down there, he said while beginning to pack his equipment. Torres stared at him in disbelief. Marcus, that's suicide. You'll be outnumbered and approaching an unknown enemy position without support. My teammates need that threat eliminated, Chen replied simply. This is how it gets eliminated. The descent from the peak took 8 minutes of controlled rappelling and careful movement through terrain that remained treacherous despite his familiarity with it. Chun moved like a ghost through the rocks and vegetation, using every skill he had learned about stalking and concealment. When he reached the depression where the enemy fighter was hidden, Chun could hear the man's radio communications with his surviving comrades. The fighter was reporting the loss of his teammates and requesting immediate reinforcements, but help wouldn't arrive in time to effect the extraction. Chun approached the position from the blind side, using natural cover to remain invisible until the final moment. When he was within 50 meters of the enemy fighter, he could see the man clearly through his rifle scope. The fighter was approximately 30 years old with a weathered appearance of someone who had spent years fighting in the mountains. The final shot of the engagement was the easiest Chun had made all night. At 50 meters, environmental factors were minimal and the target was stationary. The bullet struck precisely where Chun had aimed it, and the last threat to his teammates' extraction was eliminated. Actual, all threats neutralized, Chin reported while scanning the area for any additional enemies he might have missed. LZ is clear for extraction. Morrison's response carried relief and gratitude that needed no elaboration. Outstanding work, Ghost. We'll see you at the LZ in 5 minutes. When the extraction helicopter arrived 10 minutes later, Chin was positioned on high ground, providing overwatch while his teammates loaded the aircraft. Walsh was conscious and alert despite his shoulder wound, and all 7 surviving team members were accounted for. As the helicopter lifted off into the mountain dawn, Chun felt the exhaustion of the longest night of his military career finally catching up with him. He had made shots that military instructors insisted were impossible, moved through terrain that challenged the limits of human endurance, and eliminated threats that had seemed insurmountable just hours earlier. Torres sat beside him in the helicopter, shaking his head in amazement. "Marcus, what you did tonight will be talked about in sniper schools for the next 50 years. Chin was cleaning his rifle, performing the routine maintenance that kept precision weapons functioning reliably. "What we did tonight," he corrected quietly. "None of it works without a good spotter." Through the aircraft's window, the Afghan mountains stretched away in all directions, their peaks touched with golden light as the sun rose over terrain that had tested every skill they possessed. Somewhere in those mountains, the chemist had escaped during the chaos of the firefight, and other missions would be planned to capture him. But, for now, 8 Navy SEALs were flying home alive because one man had refused to accept that certain death was actually certain. Chin had earned his nickname, Ghost, through his ability to appear and disappear without detection. But on this night, he had become something more than invisible. He had become legendary. 6 months later, Chun received the Navy Cross for his actions during the extraction. The citation praised his extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to his teammates under the most challenging combat conditions. But Chin knew that medals couldn't capture what had really happened in those mountains. What had happened was simpler and more profound than any official recognition could describe. When his teammates needed the impossible, he had found a way to make it possible. When mathematics and probability suggested certain defeat, he had refused to accept those limitations. That was what separated good soldiers from great ones. Good soldiers followed orders and executed standard procedures. Great soldiers rewrote the rules when the rules would get their teammates killed. In the years that followed, Chun would train other snipers and share the lessons he had learned about precision shooting under extreme conditions. He would teach them about mathematics and environmental factors, about equipment and techniques, about all the technical aspects of long-range marksmanship. But the most important lesson couldn't be taught in any classroom or training exercise. The most important lesson was that when people you care about are depending on you, impossible becomes just another word for difficult. And difficult is something that can always be overcome with enough skill, determination, and willingness to risk everything for the people who matter most. The Ghost Sniper had fired from the rocks and changed the definition of what one person could accomplish when the stakes demanded perfection. That night in the Afghan mountains had proven that even in the face of certain death, there was always one more shot that could change everything.